that. Let's firstly speak to Sam Creed, a reporter over there at The Sun. The Sun have been covering this extensively, of course. Sam, I actually thought the way he delivered that was actually quite sinister, bearing in mind he's attempting to say there's nothing wrong with this, you know, it's like it's a great thing to do, it's all part of the modern world, but then kind of throwing in lines that if you don't have one, you can't go to work. It's almost like if you can't have one, you'll be locked in your house.
It's slightly scary, isn't it?
It's a bit scary, wasn't it?
Some very strong quotes from the Prime Minister, especially him saying that, you know, you will not be able to work without one of these, without one of these ideas, without one of these IDs. It's very, you know, he's made it very clear, and it's almost, it seems a little bit sort of paving over sort of cracks that we've seen. And obviously, you know, you've got the scourge of illegal migration, and I think we had in the last week, more than 1,100 people have come in, and The Sun. Obviously, we did that investigation this year.
That's right.
Where we had the migrants were coming in, these over the channel. Within hours, they were being set up. They were driving. They were riding illegally these bikes and delivering for Deliveroo, Just Eat, Uber Eats, that kind of thing. So the goal is obviously to challenge this, but the Prime Minister, you know, whether that is actually going to tackle that it remains to be seen.
I mean, it really doesn't, and you don't need to know loads about the kind of deep layers of immigration to know that it's not going to stop people coming over on a boat, because those people haven't got any ID now anyway. You know, so you in theory you wouldn't have that stuff. So if you got here, then one would assume the same thing would happen then going forward as happens now. You'd be somehow processed, they put you in a hotel. The fact that you haven't got a Brit card, which you wouldn't have to begin with. So it's kind of nonsensical in that respect.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a really good point. And also the fact that, you know, how are they going to enforce this? That's the main question I think that the government has to answer, because, you know, you've got maybe some dodgy car washes or a dodgy barber shop somewhere. How do we know that they're going to enforce that? You know, there's no way of us knowing for sure that they're going to be checking for this ID card, and how are they going to police that? And also, the main concern for people as well, with all these recent cyber attacks, is all our information going to be safe?
Well, that's also true, isn't it? And I guess, you know, we'll talk about this more with our next guest, but you know, there's always that concern that once you sort of start the database, once you have all of that apparatus in place, then it's not so much somebody go, oh, it's just going to be your passport and your national insurance number. On the face of it, you can go, that's a fairly sensible thing to do. Whack it on the phone. I've got a wallet, I've got cinema tickets in there, flights, all manner of bank accounts. You know, it's all there. Makes sense, doesn't it? But it's what happens going forward that scares people. You know, what happens to that data? Can it be used against you in some kind of way? How are you going to be tracked on what you buy in terms of, you know, in the supermarket? Will your phone bleep and preclude you from booking a flight, for example, if you've had too many flights that year?
Of course, and you know, the Big Brother Watch today have sort of labelled it Orwellian. You know, it's that kind of where's it going to go next? The government have said it's going to be you'll be able to use it for sort of childcare, welfare benefits, that kind of thing. But it's sort of going forward as well, as you say, how they're going to use that. Is it going to be linked? Are they going to be looking at our history? You know, how is it all going to sort of go going forward? And I think Labour don't know what it's going to look like yet. I think we had the Culture Secretary came on this morning, and even she was sort of getting it wrong. She said it wasn't going to be mandatory, but the Prime Minister said it will be. So there's still lots of. It's got to come together, and it's still very much in the consultation stage. But
absolutely,
it's difficult to see how it's going to be really enforced.
Yeah, indeed. Sam, thank you. Good to see you. Sam Creed from The Sun with us on the programme. They've been writing and covering this a lot today, and there's more to come. Get online, have a look at The Sun's website and catch the latest on all of that. Thank you to Sam. Let's get a word from James Melville, social and political commentator. James, it's interesting, isn't it? I think you and I have spoken about this about 100 times over the last few years. But actually, here it is. It's kind of, we've now got the official announcement of what we knew was coming.
Yeah, the so-called conspiracy theories of 2021 have come true, and it's a harsh reality. And we have spoken about this a lot. I think there's a bit of a surprise about how far Starmer has taken it, how quickly he's taken it, and the words that he's used. It's authoritarianism on steroids. It is Orwellian. I don't think Britain should be a show us your digital paper society. I don't think there's a need for this. There is aspects of verification that we already have, national insurance, driver's license, but this is framed around illegal migration. It won't solve the problem. And it feels like a form of digital entrapment and punishment on millions of people, so far as much as Starmer saying, well, you won't be able to work unless you get it.
Yeah.
Now, this poses a lot of questions, and this will come through the legislation process. But what's interesting about this is that this is one of those rare issues that it's non-partisan. There's criticism and concerns about this issue from all aspects. Lib Dems have come out against it, Reform, the SNP, and also members of the, I suppose, the old school left, the likes of Jeremy Corbyn has come out against it as well. But the connecting theme is about, I think, a general feeling that this is very un-British. This is not what we do, and this is not what we need. And also, as we've talked about before, where does this end up? It poses way more questions than answers right now.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? And I did say at the very beginning in my kind of opening rant, in fact, I wrote this: the problem with digital ID is that it's a sinister and manipulative thin end of a wedge. And the best evidence is, but the best evidence to not have digital ID is that we don't actually need it. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? If this is simply about being able to process your right to work and all the rest of it, I work in a big building. I had to, before I came here, I had to do the usual, my national insurance number, tax code, all of that kind of stuff. So we already have this. And if I was an illegal and determined to dodge the radar, as it were, then I would still do that regardless, because what I'd be doing now would be illegal. So it's not going to become more illegal because I don't have a Brit card.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, in terms of migration, verified migration, there's a thing called e-visa. That's in place as well. It's not going to stop the issue. The issue being about how do you take away the incentives for legal migration, the boats issue, and the hotels, cost to the taxpayers, and then rented accommodation, and so on. That's the problem. The incentives are still there. This is a classic example of there is a problem. We're going to provide a solution that effectively creates loads of unnecessary problems. And one of the other aspects of this is, where does this end up? It starts with something like this, around the auspice, I think, from a manipulation point of view of illegal migration. But what else gets added onto this in the future? Does this get linked into, for instance, central bank digital currencies? Or almost like a form of a social credit system about, good behavior and bad behavior deemed by the government. There's also another problem, and that is about where is the data going to go? Is it going to be safe? How much is the taxpayer going to spend on this, and who gets the revenue streams for that? Do you remember Test and Trace? The so-called £37 billion, why it didn't happen? It's taxpayers' money, so taxpayers are entitled to ask a lot of questions on this. And another thing that's a key component of it is no one voted for this. This was not in Labour's manifesto. And I think on this issue, this could be Keir Starmer's version of poll tax, because it's very, very interesting that the call-outs and the criticism aren't just coming from the usual sources on this. They're coming from right across the political spectrum. And I think this is a good thing, because it's going to be an easier thing to debate than aspects of the digital ID that's attached to COVID, like vaccine passports, which was completely illiberal anyway. But this is about the relationship right now between the people and the state. And if digital ID in Starmer's compulsory form crosses the line, then I think that relationship between the people and state changes in a very, very warped and dystopian way, and in a way that no one voted for.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And you might imagine that's the last thing Keir Starmer needs at the moment. He's already on fairly wobbly territory. James, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. James Melville, social and political commentator. Let's get a word from Alexander Iosad, Director of Government Innovation Policy at the Tony Blair Institute. Alexander, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Nice to have. It's always good to get clarity on these things. And I say this because the Tony Blair Institute, along with Tony Blair himself, have long advocated for this. I looked at your website just a little earlier. There it is, the big story with prominence. Time for digital ID, a new consensus for a state that works. Interestingly, by the way, it was written a couple of days ago before this announcement. So I don't know whether that's a coincidence, but I know it's something that, you guys feel very strongly about. Why do we need it?
We need it because it will help us to fix the state. We need it because Britons, when you ask them, actually support it. Even among reform supporters, we find that support for digital ID is 2-1 to opposition. And this reason for this is because people understand that public services are in trouble and that the country needs real change, a real fix. Digital ID won't be a silver bullet. It won't fix everything. But what digital ID does allow you to do is to rebuild a new relationship with the state, as your previous guest was saying, but not one that is intrusive, instead one that's actually built on fairness, control and convenience.
It's interesting you said that on polling, most Reform voters would go for digital ID. I mean, with respect to whatever polling is, I mean, anecdotally, certainly, that seems extraordinary.
Well, I think it's because they understand that this is a common sense solution to many of the problems that the country faces and that they themselves face in their everyday lives, in interacting with government, for example.
So you're talking about, like we have the government gateway, the HMRC thing, a kind of an Uber version of that. So everything is kind of interlinked and therefore your life becomes a lot easier. National insurance number, driving licence, passport, other healthcare numbers that you require, all of that in one place, to put it, to coin a phrase.
Not in one place. I think this is important to understand. We're not talking about a massive centralized database. We're not talking about some kind of, honeypot for cyber criminals. What we are talking about is the ability for the government to understand where some things that they know about people are about the same person, and therefore they can offer them better services, they can support them better, but also some of those everyday tasks that we do, whether that's about proving your identity, whether that's about proving your right to work, which exist already, can be done more conveniently and more consistently, so closing a lot of the loopholes that are being exploited, as we know.
This would be, I mean, so on paper, OK, streamlining stuff, making it easy, getting rid of the faff and the bureaucracy. If you put the argument like that, I think most people go, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense. There's lots of things we have now that are, it's much easier to pay for things in one place than it ever was. We get the convenience. The problem, I suppose, here is that there's a lot. One of the concerns, Alexander, is there's a lot of hoops and hurdles and an awful lot of money to get this up and running for something that kind of does sort of already exist, which leads people to wonder if there are other reasons why digital ID would be introduced, something more sinister.
I think people do have concerns about privacy security, and those are absolutely understandable concerns when it comes to something that we don't have a lot of experience with in this country. We know there are plenty of countries around the world, in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, others, that are introducing these systems or have had them, frankly, for decades, without seeing any measurable impact in terms of civil liberties. Some of the most democratic countries in the world have digital IDs and have citizens that are going, why don't you have this? This is a good thing.
There is that sense, and I suppose, COVID is perhaps a good example of it. The kind of net zero agenda, there's lots of politicians speaking very openly about how, we should be forced to reduce the amount of flights we take. We should be forced to eat less red meat or whatever. The contention on this one, connected to digital ID, is that it could ultimately be used for areas of state control over things, what we buy, what we can do. Oh, look, you filled your car up with too much petrol this week. Your petrol allowance has now been removed, and digital ID would be interconnected with our payment system. It would know that, so it would stop you. That must have been a conversation you've had in the Tony Blair office, surely.
Well, it's a conversation that, I have with people on different sides of the issue, because this is one of those questions that we do need to debate publicly. And I'm really, really happy, by the way, that this announcement has now made this into a real debate where we can have this discussion. But let me just say, on this issue of control, I think this is the wrong way around. I think what digital ID done well can give you is more control as a citizen. Because imagine this, you can see what information is held about you, why it's held, who's having access to it, and again, why are they using that information, which, for example, means that if anyone is misusing your personal data, at the moment, you can't tell because you don't know what's there.
Right.
But with a digital ID, if there's a audit log, you can see, that person has looked at my information. Why did they do that? We know in Estonia they fired people from the civil service for doing that.
But if it was something that was kind of government mandated, so, for example, the amount of, petrol or air miles or something like that, can you envisage, Alexander, a time when digital ID could be used by the state to curtail your behaviour?
In the UK, I'll be honest with you, no, I cannot, because we are a democratic country. We have checks and balances. We have a parliamentary democracy. We have a healthy public sphere where we can have these debates out in the open, and that is exactly what I hope we will do.
I've heard Tony Blair himself refer to giving up a certain amount of privacy in exchange for a far more streamlined system, and he doesn't shun away from the word global, that like it or not, that's the world we're now in. These are kind of, I'm paraphrasing here, and to be interconnected with that world makes sense, and if you don't connect with it, you're going to get left behind. So there is a surrender of some privacy here, right?
What this means is recognising that at the moment, private citizens do this all the time in their day-to-day lives. You use your Tesco card, there's data that's captured there, and you get to benefit from this. You go online, there's data that's captured, and hopefully you get to benefit from this, but actually you're exercising a lot less control over this than you would with a government digital ID, because there will be democratic accountability over how it's used.
My Tesco card, of course, gives me a reduction on things, and that's fine. My Brit card might give me a reduction on things I can do, and that's not fine.
Sorry, could you clarify the question?
Well, I mentioned before areas that flying is an obvious example, things that might feed into another government agenda. The climate net zero debate is there for all to see on a daily basis. That's the obvious one that gets talked about.
Well, I think digital ID is not directly relevant to that debate, because it is about
it's not yet, is
how
it?
do we interact with government. Well, I don't think that the kind of dystopia we're painting is on the horizon here, because, as I say, we have lots of democratic countries where they have healthy debates about this. They had digital ID for a very long time,
Indeed.
And they've not seen this types of restrictions.
Just finally, though, Alexander, my point, and I hope this is a reasonable one, I think you guys would understand it. You're a clever man. Your colleagues are as well. It's crucial, though, isn't it, that this element is explored. I mean, the government today, Keir Starmer, love him or hate him, is probably not going to start telling me that I can't buy lamb chops on a Sunday. And I don't imagine if the Tories or Nigel Farage became the next Prime Minister, they're going to stop me using my petrol. But when we debate this stuff, we have to do it seriously. We have to look at what happens going forward. You have to imagine that there could be a world where it's not quite as rosy or democratic going forward. That's important, surely.
It is important, and I would rather we built a system with these safeguards and with this debate now than have a world that's a lot harder to undo in that hypothetical, and I genuinely do not believe that hypothetical will come to pass in this country. But to entertain it for a second, I would say that I would rather have a system that's built with safeguards today than for that, tyrannical government you're describing. Nothing would stop them from doing that in the future. But I don't think, genuinely, this is where we're heading, because people will be in control of their data, and we have democratic accountability in this country.
We will watch with interest. Let's speak again, Alexander. Lovely to have you on, sir. Thank you. Alexander Iosad, who's Director of Government Innovation at the Tony Blair Institute. They've been well behind this for a long, long time. It is interesting. They wrote that story 2 days ago. The government